All right, let's get started. Great crowd today. Thanks so much to everyone for tuning into our latest water music water cooler interview. In case this is your first one, this is a bi-weekly interview series that we started up a few months ago, where we bring in people from across the water music community working on cool projects across music, tech, and business, just to get their perspective on where the music industry might be headed, and how we can think about the industry, build things in the industry in more innovative and progressive ways. In case we haven't met, I'm Sherry Hu. I'm the founder of Water Music, and I'll conduct a lot of these interviews, but a lot of times we have people on our team and across the water music community moderating as well. I'm super excited to have Srishti Das, who is the founder of a new consultancy. Her new consultancy focused on emerging music markets for today's interview. In terms of the motivation for today's conversation, as I mentioned in the event description, from artists in Mexico now topping the Billboard charts to the continuing reign of K-pop, to also the rise of a lot of amazing music genres and scenes from Africa, and just around the world. This notion of music from quote unquote emerging markets, which we'll get into what that actually means, but especially outside like the US and Europe, kind of coming up and really making their name on the global stage. It's kind of like happening on a grander scale than ever before. At the same time, as much hype as there also is a ton of noise. And I think a lot of oftentimes like misunderstanding or kind of lack of understanding about how to approach building a global music strategy in a more nuanced and more thoughtful way. So super excited to have Srishti kind of chat with us today to dive into how we can think about this concept of emerging music markets and building international music strategies more smartly, no matter what career stage we are in. As a logistical thing, so we'll chat for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll leave the last 10 to 15 minutes to address questions from you all in the audience. How we're going to handle this is if you have any questions, you can just dump them in the chat. We won't have people speak up just to kind of manage the flow of the conversation, especially as this is being recorded and will be distributed to everyone after the fact. But if you could just share your questions in the chat, someone from our team will be kind of collating them and will address them towards the end. So yeah, please, like as early as right now, feel free to fire away, and we'll address it at the end. To start off, Srishti, would love for you to introduce yourself to this group and kind of share more about your background and kind of what inspired you to start Hivewire.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here, Sherry. Hi, everyone. I'm Srishti. I'm based in Mumbai in India. I've just started Hivewire as of April, but before that, I was working at Media Research as a consultant and sports analyst, and also that was probably where I really started to think of emerging markets as separate to what I was doing overall in the music industry. And prior to that, I was working at Geo7 in the music publishing team. That was a very tough world. And before that, I worked at Mood Agent in localization. Some of the things that really shape up that job was one that really shapes up a lot of the things that I write about at Mood Agent. And before that, I was a journalist for a while, organized some conferences in India, and did my master's in music business from Berklee College of Music. But yeah, that's me. I started Hivewire because I personally, even while I was at media, I just felt like when I was looking into, especially the African market, I couldn't really find enough information or couldn't find the right way to get to people or artists in the market. It just seemed like a very closed door. But I was invited to a conference in South Africa last year in September called Music Imbizo. And I think it was a very pivotal point, not just my career, but in my life, because I experienced all these new genres of music that I'd never done before. And they were all sort of repurposed genres, and the biggest genre, and I say it all the time, I'm a hardcore fan of Amapiano, and as a house music fan for many, many, many years. I It was just a very different version of house music for me. The sounds were different, and people were so involved in accepting their identity and the sounds and the cultures that where they're from. It made me really think about my upbringing, because in India it was a promise that while growing up, if you consumed Western content, you would be cool and you were popular. And of course, that was something that I wanted to be. And so I got further and further away from what Indian culture and Indian music has always been. So Hivewire is sort of a journey of me connecting back with my roots, but also just exploring like a lot of different sort of cultures that just bring this unique sound from their home, where I'm able to, through music, just travel to different parts of the world. And that's just something that I find very exciting. Whereas also having seen the Indian music industry and some of the strategies that worked and didn't work over the last few years, where big music companies were trying to capture the market. It's just, I thought I would share whatever I was learning with all the people who are interested to learn about it. So that's Hivewire for you. There's a subscription link already in the chat. Thank you so much, Martin. And yeah, that's basically me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, like amazing, truly global journey and background. I guess as a quick follow-up question on um, the kind of work you're doing through Hivewire currently. So, because there is like, yeah, a consulting element as well. Are you working with like artists, music brands, music orgs? Like, what's the range of work you're doing at the moment?
I think to some extent with artists, it's more of like an education through like ideas, sort of a thing, like, why are you being an artist, and what is it that you're trying to say or trying to do? Because even at media, we just, the way that we define success in our surveys were like 10, 12 different options, from like, I make music for myself, to I want to be signed to a major label, to I just want to travel around the world through music. Just so many different aspects of it. So it's very important to have your goals set them according to what you really want to achieve, and build towards that. So that's something that I do with artists, and with labels, a lot of market research. I'm currently working with the Cameroon music market, which is just mind-blowing to me. Through this, I will share some of the insights from there, and also the Middle Eastern market, working with some publishing, trying to make sense of that part of the world, as I'm sure everyone in the music industry constantly is. So yeah, that's usually the kind of work that I'm doing, but a lot of projects that are based around collaboration and just bringing forward true culture from like different parts of India, as well as to some extent Africa. That's the kind of work I'm on.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, we'll dive into kind of the specifics of what that looks like later on. But first, I guess per the title of this conversation, music strategy for emerging markets. Let's zoom out and get some shared context on what that actually means from your perspective, because I think it's the term emerging markets is very broad. I know a lot of people have often like a lot of people are even trying to like avoid the term altogether, just because of how broad it is, and it could just mean so many different things depending on the context. So yeah, would love for you to share how you personally are thinking about that term in the context of your work, and if there are any specific factors you're considering when deciding which markets to focus on at any given time, whether it's like economic factors, demographic, like industry maturity. Yeah, if you could walk us through your thinking on that.
I personally hate that word so much. And I keep trying to get away from it. But unless I say emerging markets, I feel like there isn't enough context to call it anything else, because it's not just the music industry. Every industry is using the term, and every industry is using that term in a very different way. For some, it's GDP based, for some, it's I don't know, there's just so many different factors into it. But I feel like when the music industry is talking about emerging markets, they usually just mean the BRICS um, countries. Like it's mostly Latin America, some parts of Latin America, some parts of Africa, some parts of India, China, and those sort of the areas that surround those markets. So it's just, and of course it's a very very colonial word. Essentially the term emerging markets ever even came up is because the matured or the Western markets were essentially looking for new revenue opportunities because they were hitting saturation. And it was essentially just a way for international teams to find new audiences in different markets. So it started out with that, and it sort of ended up being how do I make these new markets like the US or the UK or France or Canada, whatever. How do we make them like these markets that are already successful, that are approaching saturation and have so much activity in whatever way that activity might be. But it unfortunately doesn't work that way because India or China or Brazil is not the US. We have not gone through the process of music listening, or even just, like from just live to these vinyl players to CDs through cassettes. Like in the case of India, I was very privileged that every year on my birthday, I would get to go to the music store, which is called Music World or Planet M, where to, and just pick out one cassette. So we've never really gone through this whole process of even seeing music formats change, having different players to it, finding different ways to engage with it. Fanzines happened in India when I was in like university. It never happened before that, and it wasn't really by fans making them. It was companies that were actually putting together fanzines. So it's just, the entire culture is very different. The experiences with music is very different. So it's just not the right approach. But yet, when I say emerging markets, I don't specifically mean BRICS, but it could also be like a new music trend happening even in the US for that market. Of course, that doesn't make US an emerging market, but the specific activity where that is happening will make it an emerging market, because it's all about just seeing how people are consuming or engaging or interacting or even creating music in different ways. So it is also focused very much on Latin American markets, Asian markets, the Middle East, and Africa. But I tend to call them new markets versus emerging markets being the BRICS, like everyone else. I started my first blog post titled Emerging Markets Are Diverging, to just not call it emerging markets anymore. But unfortunately, it doesn't catch on, because it needs to be changed on so many different levels for that to come through. So that's what I feel about emerging markets.
Nuance is hard in conclusion. Yeah, but what I'm picking up, just to clarify, it seems like a lot of what you're following, and in terms of like signals that are interesting, a lot of it is rooted in maybe like consumer behavior, or like especially interesting consumer or fan behavior that might not align with like what we traditionally think about when we just think of, lean back music streaming, like what happens on Spotify. um, can you speak to maybe how that like how relevant that is in terms of your analysis of what's happening on a global scale in music?
Yeah, it's the interesting aspect is also it's just so hard to get data from a lot of these emerging markets. they don't exist, or if they do, they don't exist on a country level or in a nuanced way that it should, just because of so many different factors. A lot of the companies have just come in a, Spotify came in 2018, so maybe now is the time where hopefully we should start getting some data and start understanding what's going on. But I have questions. I get questions like, what is the most popular genre and language in this country? And Bollywood is, first of all, Bollywood is not a genre. It's music that's in a film. So it's not really a genre. Bollywood might have a hip hop song but we don't even look at it from that point of view. So it's just very convoluted and very difficult to understand. So my way of usually looking at this is always observing like my friends and just going to clubs or just seeing how people are talking about things online. That's sort of been one of the big ways in which I look at it. But of course, with artists and fans, like those are the two most important people. We are all just people who are in the middle. So it's just how is the engagement happening? It's not just the engagement that a fan has with an artist, but it's also now when direct to consumer strategies have just gone up so much with like TikTok and all of these other social media tools. It's both ways. So instead of like a big data approach, it's more of like a small data approach. Nothing is obviously absolute because there's no data to go behind it, but I think what I just want for people to see is like, yeah, I see a group of people like that every time as well. I wonder if they're getting music that they want, or they can find the things that they want. Because when we look at these markets, we're only looking at the people that either have mobile phones or have internet connections, and that's not representative of the whole market. So digital music needs to be a little offline as well in these markets to really get a sense of what the music industry in these markets are actually doing, or how they're actually impacting people.
Yeah, love that. I think like this hybrid approach, like not just thinking digitally, but thinking about incorporating IRL that's like a trend I'm seeing around the world. Yeah, and no matter what kind of continent we're thinking about. Good segue into next few questions where I want to dive into some ideas or concepts that you've talked about in your newsletter, which I'll link to a specific blog post and also to the general newsletter in the chat as well. But um, I guess also still like zooming out, a term that you wrote about early on that has gained so much steam in the music marketing and business worlds recently is the term glocalization. It's definitely a mouthful. I think the music industry and like marketing in general has this tendency to just combine words in this way that they think are like interesting to combine. If you look at on Google Trends, I think like popularity of the word has just gone up um, a ton in the last few months. Um, and again, like emerging markets, the term for people who haven't heard it before, it combines global and localization, at least from my understanding. But that could also mean so many different things depending on the context. And you have a really great blog post breaking down how you actually define it from a strategic point of view, and especially how it's different from maybe traditional music industry approaches to localization or export strategies, which is very often discussed. So could you break down for us how you define localization? What are sort of kind of the quintessential elements, and maybe especially because it's not a completely new term, if there's anything that's like new about the kind of dynamics of the global music industry today that make this concept especially interesting or relevant to talk about now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because when I was in uni, it's like 10 years ago, maybe more, probably more. We studied glocalization. I did my bachelor's in fashion communication, and in our branding and marketing class, we're obviously looking at, I mean, I don't remember who termed it. I think it was in like the 70s or the 80s. So it is by in no way a new concept. It is very old. And one of the biggest examples with glocalization is McDonald's going into different markets. So in India, we would have like Maharaja Mac and like all of these names just because it's like, it's the same thing. It's a Big Mac, but it's called Maharaja Mac. So it's just a strategy to get to sell, they're going global, they're entering these new markets, but the only way they can enter these new markets is by localizing their global product. So that's essentially what glocalization is. And so in that case, Spotify, when it launched in India, they had for the first time, there were like single day plans, for example, which didn't exist before. In Indonesia, they still have, I think they still have like cards where like you go and buy it at a store, which is such an old concept. In the US, like I remember giving Apple Music like cards to people for their birthdays at times. Like it's just such an old concept, but it works there now. So that's sort of what glocalization is. And to me, I think the topic of glocalization has started to come up again because in a lot of markets, and a lot of European markets, the top 10 songs are now music from those markets. And that's a great thing because it should be that way. Like people from India should be listening to Indian music. I mean, they should be listening to Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran and all the big pop stars as well, but their own music is what is their own music. So it should be on the top. So if that's happening in other parts of the world, that's great. That means that markets all over the world are strong enough to hold their ground in their local market. So I don't think that's a big deal, that's a big win. I feel like that's how it should have always been. People should be able to access and enjoy music from their own markets because that is always going to be the music that is closest to their culture and their identity. But the topic that glocalization led me to was internationalization, which is, can McDonald's make Maharaja Mac one of the most popular burgers that McDonald's ever sells everywhere? You're sitting in the UK, you're sitting in Mexico, you're sitting in South Africa, anywhere in the world, can you sell a Maharaja Mac and with that sell what Maharaja Mac means to Indians? Because that's an experience. And I think that's the more interesting aspect because we're not talking about local markets anymore. The second you put your music up on any streaming service, it's available everywhere in the world. So you would like to make sure that your music is in the top 10 or top whatever in your own market, but it's somewhere there in all other markets as well. And that's interesting. It's also way more difficult because you have to really think about how you're going to cut through that clutter and make sure that your music is getting out there. And that involves a lot of, what I was saying in the beginning about artists, setting up your goals, figuring out what is it that you want people to associate with you outside of just your music or even through your music, both ways. So I think that's sort of the difference that I put there is you should be able to find people from your own communities that enjoy your music because they're the closest to understanding your culture. But can you take that further? And because of diasporas, that has become a lot more easier today. If you look at Afrobeats, especially Afrobeats, even K-pop, but if you look at Afrobeats or reggaeton, it's been a lot of influence from all of the people. And emerging markets have a lot of diasporas. It's how it is. And can you also connect to them? And can they make your scene so big in their market, like an Amapiano going to UK? I went to a few shows in the UK. the audience was very, very, very diverse. I thought I would be the only Indian. I was not the only Indian. Um, and it's just a lot of people from a lot of, it's not just South Africans, but there's people from other African markets over there enjoying that genre of music as well. So can we create more stories that transcend like a specific culture or a specific community and are embraced by newer communities such as hip hop? Hip hop has, every single country has their own hip hop scene. I don't know a single country that doesn't. And it's bringing back to the original hip hop. It makes hip hop stronger when other people are repurposing hip hop to fit their culture. I think that's much more interesting than trying to make hip hop fit a specific market.
Yeah, I feel like you already touched upon this, but with especially with just like general scaling international music strategies, no matter what your approach, whether you're trying to take the glocalizing approach of like making a Maharaja burger, version of your song in different markets, or trying to take a local genre and like take it truly global. Um, it does take a lot of capital, I think is very often the perception. Like you need like a proper machine behind you to like really pull that off. So I'm curious, a lot of people in this audience and also in the modern music community in general are definitely earlier stage. There may be kind of, independent artists working with limited budgets, or maybe they're like running music companies that are smaller and they might not, have as much wiggle room financially. Um, do you think uh, like glocalization or kind of, similar strategies, does it make sense to lean into in the emerging artist stage, or does that only make more sense maybe further down the line if you're more established as an artist or a brand? Just what guidance would you give for an earlier stage artist who's trying to navigate this?
I've also just started doing artist sessions because what's the point of talking about music markets if you're not speaking about artists? And the first artist that I interviewed was this artist called Sick Flip. And the reason that I interviewed him was obviously when I went to South Africa, that was the first time that Amapiano came at me as Amapiano. But before that, Sarvesh used to do a lot of these very tribal vibey parties, and they would be really small, like really small clubs, not necessarily at like 5, it would be like 300 capacity clubs and stuff where he's just putting together an IP for a venue, and playing this. He started off doing like pineapple parties, which was just him and his brother playing like a bunch of different African tunes or African inspired tunes, which were mixed with like the Indian percussive sound. And I really think that to a very large extent, there is a rising popularity for Afro house more than the others, and to some extent Amapiano as well, because he just consistently kept playing those shows over and over again and developed an audience. I don't think that any of these have anything to do with where you are in your career. There are always ways to do things, and you always start small. I think in a lot of cases where there's a directly big collaboration or a directly big thing happening between two artists from different markets, it might not necessarily work because the audience isn't ready for it. And when you see Burna Boy and Sidhu Moosewala, late hip hop artist in India who passed away a few months ago, they released a song a few months ago called Mera Na. And for the first time, I've never seen India be on the top 5 markets on Spotify for an African artist, but Delhi is number 2 over there. But does that mean if Burna Boy comes to India, it's going to sell out a stadium? It doesn't mean that at all. It I can't say with assurance that Rema's tour in India or CK's tour in India were very successful, big tours, like, like even close to, what the way that they're selling out shows outside. So I actually think that most of the good strategies in creating new culture starts bottom up rather than top down. And I think Sarvesh is a really, really great example of it. He's going to be dropping Indian sounding Amapiano later this year. And I think that's very cool. And by the time he drops that, it's 2 years in the making. There was obviously the pandemic in the middle as well. But he has developed, nurtured that market where now when he releases that music, there is a likelihood that it will do well, and it might move into the other markets and then lead to collab. And he is also doing collaborations with really, really big South African artists who are pioneers of their genre. So it could have come out already, but it hasn't been because it's just a very he understands his community, he interacts with his community, whether it's social media or even after his gigs, he's just sitting down and having a conversation with people. So I think it's really about thinking about what you want to achieve. And it's very difficult. I completely agree. It's very difficult to be an artist, but you are freer than you have ever been before, which means that you can choose to not follow the formula and make something of your own and be persistent. There is actually a good chance that you will be successful at it. So I think it's that persistence, and also just constantly trying to keep growing that community. Having collaborations, this whole month for us on Hivewire has been about strategic collaboration. Have the collaboration shouldn't just be to get your name through the door or to associate yourself from the bigger artist. It needs to be very strategic in terms of what's going to be the next step from there. Is it someone who's at the same level? How is that going to progress through the years? So it's not, you don't look at your artist career as what am I going to do in the next 3 months, but you literally look at where do you want to end up and look backwards from there, and get to where you are today. So it's such a great time to just feel like I'm gonna make whatever I want to. And there's Doja Cat. Come on, everyone! Like Doja Cat's doing that. So there's always a way to do it.
Yeah, I love that. We've talked a lot about the importance of IRL, especially in a lot of the markets that we're talking about today, of like really building bottom up communities and engaging with those scenes on the ground. Um, that said, I guess also in like classic water music fashion, we do think a lot about tech, and especially the impact that tech has on curation and discovery opportunities, especially for emerging artists. And this is where I guess social media and video apps like TikTok, of course, being probably the most hyped example, comes in. Staying also within this framework of like bottom up as opposed to top down kind of culture and community building and fan behaviors. Does anything come to mind in terms of how that's being expressed digitally? So like how is bottom up culture being built and cultivated in the markets that you're looking at, in digital spaces, whether it's social media, video, and are there any specific examples that are kind of exemplary of what this could look like?
Yeah, I think the whole rise of Amapiano has just, I mean, it's about a 10-year-old genre of music, maybe a little more than that, but it really, really, really peaked during the pandemic because artists were just sharing a lot of music and they had very specific dance moves to all of the songs. And that sort of somehow now become like a marketing campaign as well, which I find really interesting because even for me, I cannot dance to save my life. But I'm always trying to like figure out these dance moves even before a song is live so that I can make a video that I will never post, but I can just feel good about making that video and feeling like I'm a part of like that process. And Uncle Waffles who also played at Coachella and has sort of been like the queen of Amapiano for the last few years. She dropped her first album a few months ago, and there's a song called Ya Yapia. And there's a very specific dance move to it, which was viral on TikTok way before the song was released. And how did that happen? That means people are already anticipating that song coming in, that they've learned the song, they're putting the dance to unofficial versions of it. The hype was so high by the time it launched that I don't have the numbers for it, but I mean in the Amapiano world, I went to about 9 shows. Attended about 9 different sets when I was in the UK attending Amapiano shows, and every single set had that song. So it must be really popular, at least across the live circuit, for people to be enjoying it. We already know live music translates really well onto Instagram. Oh, I'm you don't have TikTok in India, so none of those trends come down to me. But on TikTok, on Instagram, I saw it everywhere. So there isn't also really one metric. People usually look at Spotify monthly listeners, but when you're looking at like the African market where internet accessibility is so low, an African artist will not get a lot of streams from local consumers over there anyway, because data is so expensive, Wi-Fi is so expensive. They can only consume it at some points, and if they usually do, it's mostly preferred to do it on YouTube. But when you look at YouTube stats, it's like crazy. That's where you sort of see all of that. So I think social media is getting social it's also really interesting, because when TikTok came up, it was the whole music industry is like the only way to be successful is to release music on TikTok. And then there was like this formula that was created: A plus B equals C. C is the only way that you're like you can be a superstar, but when a billion artists are trying to use that same formula, it doesn't cut through, and that's a problem. You can't really say anymore that if you release music on TikTok, you're going to get a lot of streams or you're going to be very famous. So it's just really, it doesn't work that way anymore. And just one of the reasons behind Hivewire is also we need to stop making everything a formula, because that's just not how. Where is the creativity in formalizing everything? And this is a creative industry, so it doesn't make sense. But I think people is the basis of what the music industry is, and just sharing what you have, what you represent, what you believe, what you enjoy with people, that's real. And that translates. It's as simple as when you know someone's not being authentic on Instagram, because you've been on Instagram forever. It's the same thing when you're doing that as an artist. People know that's not real. So
Yeah, I love that.
back to what
Yeah, always back to music, back to people and engaging with people, that being most important thing, always. Yeah. Before diving into kind of last question before opening it up, Alex sent something in the chat, but just saying out loud, yeah, please feel free to submit any questions, things that you'd like us to elaborate on, or kind of talk more about, and we'll address them in a few minutes. I guess as in terms of the last question, I'm curious on like the industry infrastructure level. So this is maybe like a contrast to a lot of what we've talked about, which is the importance of engaging on the ground with local scenes, thinking about small data. That said, on like the infrastructure level, is there anything that you are seeing is missing? Any like pain points that you've run into, especially in like helping companies and artists build out international strategies? Yes, any gaps in products, tools, or features that that you'd like to see? Also speaking to maybe like the founders or builders in this room.
I think it's really nice that everyone has access to the world, but it always needs to start with home. And one of the things that I've been seeing a lot, especially over the last week, is about Burna Boy and how his success isn't really translating into developing the Nigerian market as much. And it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, is that really his Is that really what he's supposed to do? It would be nice. It's nice to give back to the community, but is that really his job? Um, I would say no. But why isn't the Nigerian market developing as quickly as Burna Boy is developing? And the other end of the example is obviously K-pop. BTS is doing their military service, but has K-pop popularity gone down? No, there's just a new K-pop artist I hear about almost every day. The scene is just growing, progressing. The infrastructure there is so strong. If Burna Boy is not there, is Afrobeats going to really be at scale? I don't think there's an answer for that. I don't think we really know. But imagine just taking that chunk out. And why is there such a big gap between Burna Boy and Wizkid, Davido, and all of the others, where there should be more and more artists coming up every single year, every single month. So I think it's really important to build infrastructures in the markets that are seeing high growth. And that's from as basic as studios to venues. I think venues are just a big problem everywhere around. A lot of them have shut down in the pandemic. In Mumbai, usually I'm at one venue. There aren't really a lot of different options. And that just becomes a not very nice experience for the fans as well. So I think I would really like to see a lot of investment coming in towards developing an infrastructure and building an ecosystem, because that's the only way we can sustain the longevity of any of these music scenes that are really taking the globe. Like, look at reggaeton, it's still relevant. People are again repurposing reggaeton, like in Kenya, there's a mix of like genge, one of the folk music, with reggaeton called gengeton, and just that scene developing means reggaeton is moving forward, the same as hip hop. So I think we need to build out that longevity, create those opportunities for other parts of the world to reinterpret this music, and that's only going to come. The other is lots and lots of policy from the government in supporting these infrastructure. It's not just a VC coming in and saying, I'm going to make the biggest venue with like the best record. It's also the governments that need to really see what the opportunity is for these markets to develop. It means a whole lot of people in India who, from a folk music point of view, there are just so many folk artists in India that are giving up music because they don't make enough money from it. And that means huge chunks of our culture are just dying out. No one's there to take over after them. And we need to protect all of this. And we need to make sure that this music is also relevant for the current generations, and that, the music that we come from is alive for decades and centuries to come. So I think these are two very important things: infrastructure, ecosystem, community. All three very important things that should be the focus when we're thinking about emerging markets and their development.
Yeah, no, that's very well articulated, and importantly, like at the local level, like strengthening that strengthening that level first before expanding globally. Super interesting. Thank you so much. We have a ton of questions coming in, so let's dive into questions, a lot of which is kind of like just looking with more granular detail into a lot of trends that we have talked about. Let's see. So there's a question on the consumer behavior side. There's a question about mobile usage specifically, and how, if at all, that impacts the growth of certain music markets around the world. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Are there any specific examples that come to mind of markets that have really grown and are kind of maturing thanks to mobile consumption specifically?
Yeah, there's no better example than India. Data used to be so expensive, and then all of a sudden in 2017, Jio came in and provided free SIMs for everyone with 1 GB of data usage. That's a lot I still have that plan, and I don't use up all my data every day. And that really created a massive boom in entertainment consumption in India, where, because I was working at JioSavan also through this transition, and the streams just went up. The kind of music that was being consumed was no longer just Bollywood, but a lot of like South Indian music, and like a lot of very rural folkish music, a lot of devotional music. There's a lot of religion stuff going on in India, but all that aside, like a lot of different kind of music was being consumed, which automatically just meant that a lot of different kind of music was being created off the back of that. And um I do not think Spotify would have come in at the time that it did. They would have come in way later, had that geo boom not taken place. Of course, now I think they're like leading the market in terms of engagement anyway in India, but they really came off of that easy accessibility to streaming that India's never really had before. Like I wouldn't be able to use my social media enough every day. And I don't even think there were like Wi-Fi phones when I was growing up. They were just data phones. So it was a very different time. And even Wi-Fi and broadband, all of these things are very, 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 very cheap in India. I mean, it's no longer free. You still have to pay. But when you compare that to other parts of the world, it's still very, very, very cheap. And I see that Airtel has entered the African market. I hope that that's a model that they sort of start bringing in. They're in West Africa right now, that they start bringing in there, so that that whole market is able to consume entertainment with these. I don't understand why it should be so difficult. But it mobile, from a gaming point of view, from music, from a video streaming, sports streaming, everything point of view, that really is what has made Indian market, like people are looking at it right now because of what happened in 2017. So extremely important.
Amazing. Yeah, great example. Thank you. Next question is more about, I guess, differences across markets. Very good question about the dichotomy of globalization. For example, genres like K-pop and Afrobeats, which now have obviously, huge global audiences, versus markets like Japan that are very large but highly localized. Do you feel like what is causing this difference is artist or industry led? Namely, artists aren't confident they can gain popularity internationally, or maybe are missing some resources to expand internationally? Or is it fan led? For example, international fans struggle to discover localized artists, or some combination of the two.
I feel like that it involves like a lot of marketing as well. And I think playlisters in these streaming services really need to start doing the cross-cultural aspect much better. For me to do, when I'm discovering music, which I like to look for scenes and go and discover them, is on the internet that I'm actually looking for things, and then going on Spotify and looking for something and then finding it and then going through the whole process. It's like, and I've mentioned it, like that whole process of finding new music from a different part of the world. Like if I want to, if I'm going to the UK, I know that I can just Google it and figure out this is like the food that I need to eat. Then why is it so difficult for people to just be like, oh, I want to check out music from Japan because I like Death Note a lot? Why is that so difficult to do? So I feel like these strategies, it's much easier to do the same thing for like the US market, but it's not that easy to do it for Japan. And also, like a lot of these genres like cumbia, or like a lot of folk music from India, like these are not new genres of music. They're actually really, really, really old genres of music that are now accessible to the world because of streaming. and you don't necessarily know that it exists until someone tells you that you don't know, you can't know about something if you don't know it exists. So I think that, I mean, I feel like they've done the top 50 tracks from each market, but I don't, I mean, charts were great when we were supposed to have 1,000 songs in our pocket, not when we have 100,000 songs being uploaded every day. So it's just never really relevant. But I would love to be able to travel to different parts of the world, just like click on Spotify and here's like the sound of like what's happening in the underground techno scene in Japan. And I think that's what we need more gatekeepers for. I know I say it, when I heard someone say it for the first time, I was like, what are you talking about? But essentially gatekeepers or curators, people that represent the scene, that are able to share it with new people and bring them in. I think that, there's, when Sherry put out her whole list of people who are running their own newsletters, I think that's sort of an indication of just different people wanting to really take control or share the narrative that they really believe in. And I think that's going to start happening a lot in music as well. I think I do feel like a lot of different platforms in the platform era are going to come up that are really more specialized, and like the distribution process of information is going to change a lot in the next few years.
That is like the digital expression of what you're talking about with like scene building, local scene building, I think.
Yeah.
And just like having that happen digitally. So it's great. Thank you. Next question. There are a bunch of interesting questions about financing and the role of finance in growing these markets in general. And in particular, there's a question about whether investors who've been doing catalog investments and buyouts in quote unquote Western markets, whether they're looking at emerging markets at all, and if so, who? Have you been following that world? Is there any activity happening there? No.
Not so much, but I think it would be so difficult to do so as well. Like unless there's like a Burna Boy or someone who's already established that level of, I don't even know what to describe Burna Boy as, like that level of legend. Like I don't think you can really that would you don't really know what's going to work or what's not going to work yet. I think a lot of these, there are only three really big scenes, that's reggaeton, K-pop, and Afrobeats. But and they've only started to come out over the last few decades. So we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. And maybe my take is it's going to get way, way, way more fragmented. And you're going to really have, like, people are really going to go for like music that speaks to them on an identity and a personal level rather than what's popping and what's sounding like what everyone else. I think people are going to want, like, I will want to listen to completely different music from my best friend and be like, yeah, look, I have like this cool thing that I can share with you and this cool thing that you can share with me, rather than everyone going in the direction of what is big. So I don't really know what's going to happen. It's definitely one of the things that I really want to look into, but I think it's probably very difficult for them to anticipate what's going to happen.
Yeah, still thinking about the catalog investments that are happening. It definitely is the culmination of several decades worth of kind of like build up and career development for sure. Yeah. For time, I think we'll just take one more question. And I'm going to take a question that is a direct follow up to what you were talking about of maybe more niche or like specialized listening experiences coming up. There's a question asking about fandom in these markets and how, I guess, like India being one exception, there are a lot of markets that have limited internet availability, such that streaming might not be like the main channel through which they're discovering or consuming music. Are you finding any other interesting ways that fans are listening digitally or engaging with artists digitally outside of, especially maybe outside of consuming music? Like, are they buying merch? Are they building these like fan clubs online? Are there any trends that you're seeing there?
I think live has just really been a really big aspect of how scenes have been moved, which is it's so great. It's just going back to like the human experiences without really a lot of tech. And I just love to go through like, I mean, Boiler Room and Mixmag, these are like the really stereotypical sort of they're the mainstream of the niche version of like these parties and these sets. But I've been seeing there's a lot of live stuff that's happening. And like one of my favorite Amapiano artists, Major League DJs, they started doing this balcony mix during the pandemic, where they would just play music from their balcony. I mean, it was actually their bedroom, but they called it balcony mix, and now they just go to different parts of the world and they continue to do it. And it's just not the usual concert format to like a live scene. And it's just, for me, especially getting into Amapiano, it was just so interesting to see how casual and laid back these parties actually are. People are drinking, there's like a lot of space, and then three people just break into like a long twerk that's just going on. And I don't understand how they're doing it, but it's so cool to look at as well. So I think it's, at least I don't really think this is going to last for a very long period of time. I think this is mostly a function of people not having access to live shows for almost 2 years, that it's coming back this hard. um but YouTube is always really, really, really important. I think if people have limited data, the thing that they rely on is YouTube. And YouTube it's just the home to everything. And I think that's why visual media, I think, is going to start getting a lot more important. And that doesn't mean music videos, but it's like just different forms of storytelling. One of my favorite examples is I just got into like drill and grime, which I don't listen to hip hop at all. This is like the first time I really got into it, and I was seeing Central Seas, whole Colombia, Atlantic war taking place, and just listening to all of that stuff. And I didn't understand anything he was talking about. What is P's? What are G's? I have no idea what all of this is until I watched Top Boy. And then I listened to like a documentary, and I was just going through different forms of content to understand. And now in like a month, I know so much that when me and my friends in India see each other, we say Wagwan instead of saying what's going on. So I think like it somehow just becomes like a part of your culture. And a lot of our friends are looking at us and saying that's not even your language or your culture. Why are you doing it? Just makes me feel nice and makes me feel like I'm a part of the world that Dave and Central C and Stormzy and H and all of them are. And it's just a nice, makes me feel connected to them, makes all of us feel connected to them. So, and we're so far away. So I think it's going to become that integrated storytelling network of like how your music translates to visual storytelling, to podcast, to all of these different things. And unfortunately, it's a lot more work for artists. But make really good teams and work with your friends and just create your own community, which starts with artists. It's the artists form their community, and then the people join that community. And drill grime is a really good example for that. You never see one of them without the other. So I think that's just where we're headed, to much more integrated entertainment.
Integrated, yeah, I love that, integrated, and also with even like the ability to engage in a community level. I think even like, yeah, YouTube, thinking like early SoundCloud, like just they have that ability that major DSPs don't have. So still essential.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think given the time, we will wrap, but as a closing note, we can share a link to your newsletter again in the chat, but do you have any like recommended ways that people can reach out to you? There are a bunch of questions we weren't able to get to, so just ways that people can contact you and learn more.
Yeah, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I guess I can just share my LinkedIn on here, or you will find it on the newsletter as well. But yeah, LinkedIn is a really great place. And you can email me. It's Srishti at hivewire.club, which is I'll just type that out. Actually, it's much more convenient. And yeah, I mean, please feel free to drop me your questions on email or on chat on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer them as much as I can. Or if I can't, then thank you so much, because now I have a new thing to look into. So please feel free. I'm more than happy to have a conversation, to get on a call, to have a chat. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope you all just find new ways to engage with music that really makes you feel like you've experienced something that's totally different, just like Amapiano is to me. I don't think I'll ever forget the impact that that genre has had on my life and my career. And it's such a nice feeling to be connected with what you love about music when you were growing up. So I hope everyone keeps finding that throughout their lives.
I love that. Very, very heartwarming. Yeah, note to end on. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you all again for being here, listening and engaging, and especially sharing really good questions. We'll be back in 2 weeks for the next water cooler, so keep an eye out on your inbox for that. And also, we have a Discord server. You can feel free to drop any follow-up questions async there as well, and I can pass them on to Srishti, or we can kind of address them directly there. Yeah, thank you so much again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep, take care.
Okay.